The mail-order bride never arrived, until a rancher found her crawling to stay alive. Ethan Cole had spent most of his life on the wide, empty plains of Montana. The land was harsh and beautiful, stretching farther than the eye could see, with tall grasses waving in the wind and mountains standing like silent guards in the distance. Ethan had inherited the ranch from his father, and after his wife passed away several years ago, he had been living alone in the quiet rhythm of farm life. Days passed in a steady pattern, waking early, feeding the cattle, mending fences, checking the fields, and keeping the ranch running no matter the weather. Though the work was demanding, Ethan found comfort in it. The land never judged, never complained, and never left him alone. But it also could not offer the warmth of a companion, someone to share the long evenings with, someone to talk to about hopes, fears, or simple daily life. Ethan had tried friendships and even brief romances in the past, but life on the ranch was lonely and unforgiving. Most women who came to the small town nearby had dreams of city life, of lights and bustle, and the rough, endless plains of Montana did not fit their expectations. Over time, Ethan learned to accept his solitude as a quiet companion, but deep in his heart, a part of him still longed for someone to share the silence with, a woman who understood the rhythm of the land, who could find beauty in the empty horizon, who could share the hard work without complaint. One evening, while sitting on his porch and watching the sun dip behind the distant hills, Ethan decided to take a bold step. He had heard of mail-order brides through letters and newspapers, stories of men in rural America finding women from distant cities willing to start a new life on the frontier. It seemed old-fashioned, almost strange, but Ethan didn't care. He needed someone in his life, someone to care for, and who could care for him in return. With careful thought, he placed an advertisement in a popular, letter-based publication describing himself honestly, a hard-working rancher, widower, steady and reliable, looking for a woman willing to share a life on the land. Days turned into weeks. Every morning, Ethan walked to the mailbox with a small spark of hope in his chest, only to find letters from other men, advertisements, bills, or occasionally a note from distant relatives. Then one day a letter arrived with a neat, feminine handwriting, full of hope and warmth. It was from a woman named Clara Bennett, who lived in a city several states away. She wrote about her life in careful, thoughtful words, explaining her desire to leave the crowded streets and noisy life behind and start anew in the calm of the countryside. She described herself as independent, hard-working, and eager to embrace a life of simplicity and honesty. Ethan read her letter over and over. There was something in her words that spoke to him. Her handwriting was careful but not stiff, her words polite but honest, and there was a quiet determination that reminded him of the ranch itself, strong, unyielding, and patient. He wrote back immediately, telling her about the ranch, his life, and the challenges they would face together. He described the long winters, the endless chores, the isolation, and also the beauty of the sunsets, the satisfaction of a well-tended field, and the comfort of a home built from love and hard work. Weeks passed, and letters continued to arrive back and forth. Each letter brought a little more of Clara's life into Ethan's hands, her favorite books, the smell of her garden, the quiet moments she cherished in the city. In return, Ethan shared tales of his daily life, the birth of a calf, the repair of a broken fence, or the sighting of a rare bird near the creek. Slowly, a bond formed across hundreds of miles, a bond built on honesty, curiosity, and a shared longing for companionship. Ethan began preparing the cabin where Clara would live when she arrived. It was a small, sturdy home on the edge of the ranch, with a porch that caught the morning sun and a fireplace for the long, cold Montana winters. He cleaned every corner, repaired the roof, painted the walls, and even planted a small garden nearby. Every detail mattered to him because he wanted her to feel welcomed, safe, and respected. He imagined her walking through the door for the first time, tired from her journey, but smiling with relief, and he could almost see her sitting by the fire, holding a cup of tea, and looking out at the stars with him. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, no train arrived. Clara's letters slowed and then stopped altogether. There were excuses at first: delays in travel, illness in her family, or unforeseen obstacles. But eventually, there was nothing. Ethan began to feel an unfamiliar emptiness in the space where hope had been growing. He checked the train schedule repeatedly, visited the nearby towns to ask if anyone had seen her, and even wrote a few desperate letters, but no reply came. Ethan's neighbors began to notice the change in him. They were kind people, often stopping by to check on him or share news from town. Some offered advice. Perhaps it was better to give up hope. Perhaps it was time to accept life as it was. Others whispered doubts about mail-order brides, calling them old-fashioned or risky. But Ethan did not listen. Deep down, he knew he could not give up on her, or at least on the idea of her. There was something in those letters, something in the person they belonged to, that gave him a sense of connection he had never felt before. He spent his days tending the ranch, but his thoughts often wandered to Clara. He imagined her crossing the plains on a train, her face anxious yet determined, clinging to the hope of a new life. He pictured her arriving with a small bag, weary from the journey, yet smiling as she stepped onto the porch of the cabin he had prepared for her. Ethan imagined the conversations they would have late at night, the laughter and small arguments over daily chores, the quiet comfort of shared meals, and the warmth of a fire during the long winters. Each thought was bittersweet, a mix of hope and worry, because he could not be certain she would ever arrive. Even with uncertainty pressing on him, Ethan refused to give up. He maintained the ranch as if she were already there, speaking aloud as he worked sometimes, describing the view of the mountains or the sound of a distant hawk circling overhead. He wrote letters that he never mailed, addressed to her as if she could read them through the wind or the stars. In his heart he held a quiet promise: if she ever came, he would be ready. As the months stretched on, Ethan began to notice signs along the usual trails leading from the train station to his ranch. A torn piece of cloth caught on a bush, a footprint half covered by wind-blown dirt. Each discovery brought a mixture of fear and hope. Perhaps Clara had tried to reach him but had been delayed or lost her way. Perhaps something had gone wrong. The uncertainty gnawed at him, but it also gave him purpose. He could not sit idle. He rode out on his horse every morning, checking the land, calling her name softly across the plains, scanning for any sign of her. Life on the ranch continued, harsh yet steady. Ethan faced freezing mornings, scorching afternoons, and storms that turned fields into mud and rivers into torrents. He repaired fences in the pouring rain, fed the livestock through snowstorms, and walked long distances across uneven land. All of it seemed harder without Clara there to share the burden. And yet, the thought of her kept him moving, kept him hoping, and kept him ready for the day she would finally appear. Evenings were the hardest. The sun would sink behind the mountains, leaving a quiet darkness that stretched across the land. Ethan would sit by the fireplace, the room dim and empty, imagining her presence, the sound of her voice, the movement of her hands as she prepared food, the simple act of sitting nearby, sharing warmth and conversation. He told himself that she was out there somewhere, battling her own challenges, and that she would arrive when she was able. That belief, fragile as it sometimes felt, gave him the strength to continue, to hold on to hope even when everything in the world suggested he should let go. And so, life continued, steady, lonely, and filled with small acts of preparation, care, and expectation. Ethan worked, hoped, and waited. The ranch remained as it always had, a place of hard work and quiet beauty. But now it was also a place of anticipation, a place holding a promise across miles of plains and forests. And deep down, Ethan believed that one day Clara would arrive, and the long, silent nights would finally be filled with laughter, conversation, and the warmth of shared life. Until then, he waited, watching the horizon, ready for the journey to continue. Weeks passed since Ethan had last received a letter from Clara. Each day he checked the mailbox with a mixture of hope and anxiety, hoping for a glimpse of her handwriting, a note promising she was still on her way. But the mailbox remained empty, only carrying the usual bills, advertisements, and occasional letters from neighbors. Each empty day felt heavier than the last, and Ethan's heart grew restless. He could not shake the worry that something had gone wrong during her journey. Ethan remembered the last letter he received from Clara. She had written about her excitement to leave the city behind, describing her nervous anticipation as she prepared for the trip to Montana. She mentioned the long train ride, the strangers she might meet, and how she was determined to start a new life, no matter the challenges. Her words had been full of hope, and he could almost hear her voice as he read them. But now, weeks later, there was only silence. Unable to bear the uncertainty, Ethan decided to investigate. He rode into the nearby town, hoping to find some news about Clara's journey. The town was small and people knew each other well. As Ethan asked questions, he noticed how the townspeople reacted to the mention of a mail-order bride. Some frowned, shaking their heads, warning him that such arrangements were risky. Others offered stories about women who had simply changed their minds, afraid of life on a remote ranch. Ethan listened quietly, not letting their words discourage him, but he could feel a growing knot of fear in his chest. Determined to find some clue, he made his way to the train station, the place where Clara should have arrived. The station master was an older man with kind eyes who remembered seeing Clara's ticket. "Yes," the man said slowly, "a young woman came through here. She was nervous but determined. She bought a ticket to your town, but she never boarded the next stage of her journey. Something must have happened along the way." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. His mind raced with questions. How far had she traveled? Was she still alive? Had she been hurt or stranded somewhere alone? A thought of her out in the wild, facing dangers on her own, made him shiver. He knew the journey to the ranch would be long and difficult for anyone unaccustomed to the land, and the thought of Clara struggling without help filled him with unease. Returning to the ranch, Ethan could not focus on his usual work. He walked the fields aimlessly, scanning the horizon for any sign of a traveler or a struggle. He checked the trails he had prepared for her, looking for footprints, torn clothing, or any indication that someone had passed that way. The snow had already started melting, leaving mud and waterlogged trails, making it difficult to see clear signs. Still, Ethan refused to give up. Every detail mattered, every possibility had to be considered. He kept a watchful eye, knowing that time was crucial if Clara were in trouble. One cold morning, as Ethan rode his horse along a narrow trail leading to a distant creek, he noticed something unusual. A small piece of fabric, light and torn, fluttered in the wind, caught on a bush near the edge of the path. He dismounted and approached carefully. It looked like a piece of a shawl, the kind a city woman might wear to stay warm. His heart raced. Could it be hers? He examined the surrounding area, noticing footprints partially covered by mud and leaves. The prints seemed to struggle through the soft ground, as if the person had been exhausted or injured. Ethan followed the trail cautiously. He kept his horse close, and called out softly, "Clara, are you there?" His voice echoed across the empty fields, but only the wind replied. The trail led through dense bushes and uneven ground, eventually ending near a shallow stream. There he found more signs: a broken branch, footprints that disappeared into the dirt, and small items scattered as if someone had dropped them while trying to move quickly. Ethan felt a mix of relief and fear. It seemed she had been here, but the trail was incomplete. Something must have happened to her along the way. He returned to the ranch, worry gnawing at him. That night, he could not sleep. He sat by the fireplace, staring into the flames, imagining Clara out there in the cold, exhausted, and alone. He thought about the dangers she could face: wild animals, cold nights, rough terrain, and even strangers who might take advantage of her vulnerability. He knew he had to act. Waiting and hoping was no longer enough. He had to find her before it was too late. The next morning, Ethan prepared for a longer search. He packed supplies, blankets, food, water, and first aid items. He saddled his horse and rode out, following the faint trail he had found the day before. The land was difficult to navigate. Streams had swollen from recent rain, and thick underbrush slowed his progress. He called out her name repeatedly, hoping she could hear him, hoping she had survived and was waiting for help. As hours passed, Ethan grew more determined. He remembered Clara's letters, her excitement and hope for a new life, and he refused to believe she had given up. He pushed through exhaustion, carefully scanning every inch of the land. The trail eventually led him to a remote area near the edge of the forest, far from the main paths. Here, the signs were more alarming: footprints that looked weak and scattered, broken branches, and dirt clumps that suggested someone had fallen. Ethan's heart pounded. She was close. He could feel it. But he needed to move carefully, ensuring he did not miss any clue. By evening, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the plains. Ethan stopped to rest near a ridge, scanning the horizon. He felt a mixture of fear and hope. The thought of Clara surviving the journey, exhausted but alive, pushed him forward. He remembered her words in the letters about bravery and determination, and he knew she would fight to stay alive. But the thought of her alone and vulnerable also made him anxious. He could not shake the fear that time was running out. As darkness fell, Ethan returned to the ranch, planning to continue the search at first light. He did not sleep that night, keeping a lantern lit by the cabin door, listening to the sounds of the land, the howl of distant wolves, the rustle of leaves, the soft call of birds settling for the night. Every sound reminded him that Clara was out there somewhere fighting to survive. He prepared supplies for another day, determined to follow the trail no matter how far it led. Over the next several days, Ethan's search became more organized. He rode longer distances, checked abandoned cabins and barns along the way, and spoke to anyone who might have passed through the area. Each lead brought hope, and each dead end brought frustration. But he refused to give up. The thought of Clara surviving, of seeing her arrive safely at his ranch, kept him moving. He also began preparing for the possibility that she might need immediate care. He cleaned and stocked the small cabin with extra blankets, food, and water. He checked the fireplace and stocked firewood to ensure warmth during cold nights. He practiced first aid procedures he had only read about in books, hoping he would be ready to help her if she appeared injured or ill. Every action was guided by the possibility that she might arrive sooner than expected, in need of immediate help. Throughout the search, Ethan reflected on the bond that had grown between them through letters. Even though he had never met Clara in person, he felt he knew her. Her determination, her kindness, her humor, and her courage. That connection drove him forward, giving him energy and focus during long hours of riding, walking, and searching. He could not ignore the sense of responsibility he felt, not only as a man who had invited her to start a new life, but as someone who cared deeply for her safety and well-being. One morning, as Ethan followed the trail toward a small creek far from the main road, he noticed something unusual: a small piece of clothing partially buried in mud and leaves. He dismounted and picked it up carefully. It looked like it had been torn during a struggle, a sign that someone had been here before him and had faced difficulty moving through the land. Ethan's pulse quickened. He was getting closer. He called out her name softly, hoping she could hear him. The days that followed were tense and exhausting. Ethan did not stop searching, even when fatigue and hunger began to weigh on him. He knew that every hour mattered, that Clara's survival depended on his determination, and that he could not give up. The fear of losing her pressed on him, but so did hope. The hope that he would finally find her alive, that he could bring her to safety and begin the life they had dreamed of together. Ethan's search was no longer just about letters and anticipation. It had become a mission, a test of endurance, courage, and patience. The land was unforgiving, and the journey was difficult, but he refused to turn back. He trusted that Clara was out there, fighting for her life, and he was determined to reach her before it was too late. The morning was cold and misty when Ethan set out again. The plains were quiet, except for the occasional sound of distant birds and the crunch of his horse's hooves on the frozen ground. His heart felt heavy, yet determined. Every day without news of Clara felt like a lifetime. He had followed every clue, retraced every step, and now he hoped that persistence would lead him to her. Ethan moved carefully through the dense brush near the edge of the creek, scanning every rock, tree, and patch of ground for signs of her presence. He remembered the torn fabric and the footprints from before. They had led him here, deeper into the wilderness where few traveled. The land was wild and unforgiving, full of hidden dangers, slippery rocks, muddy banks, and cold water that could sap the strength of anyone caught unprepared. He urged his horse forward slowly, careful not to miss any sign of movement. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, casting light over the fields and sparkling off the creek water. Ethan called out her name softly, trying not to alarm any wildlife, but hoping that Clara could hear him if she was nearby. His voice carried over the empty landscape, echoing faintly from the hills. He dismounted to check the ground more closely, examining footprints, broken branches, and disturbed soil. Then, finally, he saw it, a faint movement near a muddy bank at the edge of the creek. Ethan's heart raced. He urged his horse to stay back and approached cautiously on foot. There, partially hidden behind a bush, was a figure struggling to crawl across the ground. At first, he thought he might be imagining things. The figure was weak, pale, and thin, moving with incredible effort through the mud. But then, as he drew closer, he saw the face, a face he had imagined for months from the letters. It was Clara. She looked exhausted, her clothes torn and soaked from the damp grass and cold water. Mud and dirt covered her hands and knees, and her hair hung in tangled strands around her face. Her lips were dry, and her breathing was shallow. Ethan dropped to his knees beside her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Clara," he said softly. "It's Ethan. You're safe now. I'm here." Her eyes fluttered open, filled with relief, fear, and disbelief. She tried to speak, but her voice was barely a whisper. I didn't think anyone would find me," she said, trembling. Ethan carefully lifted her into his arms, supporting her weak body as he carried her back toward his horse. Her movements were slow and painful, and he could feel her trembling against him. He whispered reassuring words, telling her to hold on, that she was safe, and that everything would be all right. Once she was securely seated on the horse, Ethan rode slowly back to the ranch, careful not to jostle her injured body. The journey felt long, but every step brought him hope. He remembered the letters, the dreams they had shared, and the bond they had formed without ever meeting in person. Now that bond had become real, tangible, and more urgent than ever. Clara had survived against incredible odds, and it was up to him to ensure she could recover. Arriving at the ranch, Ethan carefully lifted Clara into the cabin. He laid her gently on a prepared bed, wrapping her in warm blankets. He checked her for injuries, bruises from falls, scratches from branches, and signs of frostbite on her fingers and toes. She shivered uncontrollably, but he reassured her with calm words and soft touches. "You're safe now," he said. "You're going to be all right. Just rest. I'll take care of everything." Over the next few hours, Ethan tended to her as best as he could. He brought her warm tea and small pieces of food, coaxing her to drink and eat slowly. He cleaned her scrapes and cuts with water and cloth, careful not to cause further pain. Clara's body was weak, but her spirit remained. She spoke little, resting her head on the pillow, eyes flickering open occasionally to watch Ethan move about the room, tending to her needs. As the days passed, Clara began to regain some strength, though recovery was slow. She told Ethan about her journey, the challenges she faced, and how she had tried to survive alone. She described the cold nights, the hunger, and the fear that had threatened to overwhelm her. Yet even in her weakness, there was a quiet determination in her words, a sign of the courage that had carried her through the worst moments. Ethan listened carefully, feeling a mixture of sorrow, admiration, and relief. She had survived against all odds, and now they had a chance to start anew. Ethan adjusted his routine to accommodate her recovery. He tended to the animals during the day, returning to check on Clara regularly. He brought her blankets, food, and warm water, ensuring she was comfortable and safe. He even prepared small tasks for her to regain a sense of purpose, such as organizing supplies or helping with simple chores in the cabin, all while respecting her limits. Each day, her strength returned a little more, and with it, her spirit. Clara's presence brought a new energy to the ranch. The long, quiet hours of solitude were now filled with conversation, laughter, and shared moments. She asked questions about the land, the animals, and the daily work, eager to understand the life Ethan had built. In turn, Ethan shared stories about the ranch, the land, and his experiences growing up there. Their bond grew stronger each day, built not only on letters and hope, but now on real experiences and shared survival. Despite the relief of finding Clara alive, Ethan remained vigilant. The land could be unforgiving, and he knew that her body was still fragile. He encouraged her to rest, to pace herself, and to ask for help whenever needed. He also prepared for any emergencies, ensuring that first aid supplies were stocked and that they had enough food and warmth for the coming weeks. Every precaution was taken to make sure she would not face another crisis alone. Through these days of recovery, Ethan learned more about Clara's personality. She was resilient, resourceful, and intelligent, traits that had helped her survive alone in the wilderness. Yet she was also gentle, kind, and curious, finding joy in small things, the way sunlight reflected on the creek, the sound of birds singing in the morning, or the smell of fresh bread baking in the cabin. Ethan admired her for both her strength and her tenderness, realizing that their connection was deeper than he had imagined from letters alone. As Clara regained her strength, she began to take small steps outside the cabin. Ethan accompanied her, supporting her as she walked through the fields, gradually introducing her to the tasks of ranch life. She learned to feed the animals, mend fences, and care for the garden, all while respecting her limits. Each accomplishment, no matter how small, brought a sense of pride and healing. She was no longer just a visitor. She was becoming part of the land, part of the ranch, and part of Ethan's life. The experience also strengthened Ethan's understanding of resilience and patience. He had spent months waiting and searching, driven by hope and concern. Now, seeing Clara recover, he realized that true care required more than rescue. It required support, guidance, and understanding. He learned to listen to her needs, to anticipate challenges, and to encourage her growth without pressure. In turn, Clara's recovery and determination inspired him, reminding him that hope and perseverance could overcome even the most daunting challenges. Evenings in the cabin became a time of quiet reflection. They would sit together by the fire, talking softly about the past, the journey that had brought them together, and the dreams for the future. Clara sometimes read aloud from books she had brought, while Ethan shared his experiences on the ranch. The long nights of solitude were replaced with warmth, companionship, and the quiet joy of shared life. Slowly, the wounds of fear, loneliness, and exhaustion began to heal, replaced by a sense of safety, trust, and connection. Despite the relief and progress, Ethan remained aware of the fragility of their situation. Clara's health was still delicate, and the wilderness could not be tamed entirely. He continued to monitor her closely, prepared for any setback and always ready to provide care. Yet he also allowed moments of freedom, encouraging her to explore the land, enjoy the sunlight, and participate in the daily rhythms of ranch life. This balance of caution and freedom helped Clara regain not only her strength, but also her confidence. Weeks passed and Clara's recovery continued steadily. The initial fear and exhaustion gradually gave way to energy, curiosity, and even humor. She began to laugh again, sometimes at small mistakes or accidents during chores, and Ethan found joy in her growing spirit. Their days became filled with productive work, learning, and companionship. The bond they had formed through letters and worry now became tangible through shared experience, mutual respect, and deepening care. By the time the first signs of spring appeared, Clara was strong enough to walk long distances, assist with ranch work, and participate fully in daily life. Ethan watched her with pride and relief, knowing how far she had come. The struggles she had endured had tested her body, mind, and spirit, yet she had emerged stronger, more determined, and ready to embrace a new life. Together they had survived the harshest moments, and now they could begin building the life they had imagined for so long. Spring had arrived at the ranch, bringing warmer temperatures and longer days. The snow had melted, leaving behind soft green grass, and the air was filled with the fresh scent of earth and growing plants. For Ethan and Clara, life seemed to be settling into a new rhythm. She had recovered her strength and began assisting with ranch chores, learning the routines of feeding the livestock, tending to the garden, and mending fences. The cabin that had once been a place of recovery had now become a shared home filled with conversation, laughter, and the quiet joy of companionship. Despite this progress, the challenges of ranch life were never far away. One afternoon, as Ethan inspected a distant field, he noticed a herd of cattle had broken through a weak section of fencing. The animals were scattered across the open plains, and some were dangerously close to a cliff edge. Panic surged through him, but he knew he could not handle the situation alone. He turned back toward the cabin to fetch Clara. "Clara!" he called, waving his arms to get her attention. She was nearby, tending to the vegetable garden, and she looked up immediately, her expression alert. Ethan explained the situation quickly, pointing toward the field where the cattle had wandered. Without hesitation, Clara grabbed a sturdy rope and ran toward him. She had grown stronger and more confident, and her presence was no longer one of weakness, but of determination and courage. They reached the field together, scanning the scattered herd. Some cows were grazing near the cliff, their movements slow but unaware of the danger. Ethan and Clara knew they had to act carefully or risk losing them. Ethan tied a rope to his saddle and instructed Clara to follow his lead. Together they guided the cattle, calling out to them and using the rope to gently steer them away from danger. It was slow, painstaking work, testing their patience and coordination. Suddenly, one of the younger calves panicked and ran toward the cliff edge. Clara instinctively ran to block its path, but the ground beneath her gave way slightly. She stumbled, losing her balance, and Ethan's heart stopped for a moment. He lunged forward, grabbing her arm just in time to prevent her from falling. She looked up at him, wide-eyed and shaken, and he held her tightly. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Clara nodded, though her hands trembled, and they both took a moment to steady themselves. Once the immediate danger was over, they continued guiding the herd back toward the safe enclosure. The task had taken longer than expected, leaving both of them exhausted and covered in dirt and sweat. Yet, as they finished, there was a shared sense of accomplishment. They had faced a challenge together and emerged safely. Clara's strength and courage had impressed Ethan, and he felt a renewed respect and admiration for her. That evening, as they returned to the cabin, a sudden storm rolled in. Dark clouds gathered quickly, and the wind howled through the plains. Rain began to fall, first in light drops, and then in a heavy downpour. The cabin shook with each gust of wind, and the sound of thunder echoed across the land. Ethan and Clara hurried to secure the livestock in the garden, working together in the rain. They tied loose objects, reinforced fences, and brought the animals closer to the barn for safety. The storm grew stronger as night fell. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the fields in brilliant bursts. Rainwater poured into the low areas of the ranch, creating small streams and puddles. Clara, despite her initial fear, remained calm and focused, assisting Ethan with every task. She had grown resilient, learning to adapt to the unpredictable nature of ranch life. Yet the storm tested both their physical endurance and emotional strength, pushing them to the limits of exhaustion. Around midnight, as the storm raged on, Ethan noticed smoke rising from a small outbuilding near the edge of the property. One of the sheds used for storing hay and tools had caught fire, likely struck by lightning. Panic surged through him. The fire could spread quickly, especially with the wind carrying embers toward the main barn where the animals were sheltered. He grabbed a bucket of water and ran toward the shed, but the fire was too strong for one person to control. "Clara, help me!" he shouted over the roar of the storm. She ran to his side, and together they began forming a chain, passing buckets of water from the creek to the burning shed. The fire crackled and hissed, sending smoke into their eyes, but they refused to give up. Each bucket was a small victory, slowing the spread of the flames and buying time. Their movements were synchronized, each trusting the other completely. At one point, a section of the shed collapsed, sending burning debris flying dangerously close to them. Clara stumbled, and Ethan grabbed her arm again, pulling her to safety. Their hearts raced, and they could barely breathe from the smoke and exertion, but neither hesitated. They were determined to protect the ranch, the animals, and each other. Hours passed, and their strength began to wane. The storm showed no sign of stopping, and the fire continued to burn fiercely. Ethan and Clara exchanged a look, understanding that they needed to act strategically. They moved closer to the animals, ensuring they were secure and calm. Then, together, they focused on the remaining fire, using every ounce of energy to douse the flames and prevent further destruction. Finally, just as dawn began to break, the fire was under control. The storm had passed, leaving the land wet and glistening, with the sun rising through scattered clouds. Ethan and Clara stood together, soaked and exhausted, but victorious. They looked over the ranch, taking stock of the damage. Some fences were broken, a portion of the shed was destroyed, and the fields were waterlogged, but the animals were safe, and the cabin remained secure. The intensity of the night had left them both physically and emotionally drained. They returned to the cabin, changing into dry clothes and wrapping themselves in blankets. For the first time in months, they allowed themselves to sit quietly, letting the adrenaline fade and the reality of their survival sink in. They had faced one of the most dangerous moments of ranch life together and emerged stronger, their bond deeper than ever. As they sat by the fire, Clara finally spoke. "I never thought I would survive the journey," she said softly. "And I never thought I would face something like this so soon after arriving. But I'm glad I did."
I'm glad it was with you. Ethan looked at her, his eyes filled with emotion.
"I'm glad too," he replied. "We faced it together. And that's what matters. You're safe now, and we can rebuild everything that was damaged." The events of the night became a turning point for both of them. Clara realized that she had truly found a home and a partner who would stand by her through any challenge. Ethan recognized her strength and resilience, understanding that their bond was no longer based solely on letters or anticipation, but on shared experiences, trust, and mutual respect. The night had tested them both to their limits, revealing their true character and the depth of their connection. In the days that followed, Ethan and Clara worked together to repair the damage from the storm and fire. They rebuilt fences, restored the garden, and cleared debris from the fields. The work was hard, but the experience had strengthened their partnership. Each task they completed together became a symbol of their determination, courage, and shared commitment to the ranch and to each other. Through this intense period, their relationship grew beyond simple companionship. They had learned to rely on one another completely, trusting in each other's judgment, strength, and care. Clara's confidence in her ability to survive and adapt deepened, and Ethan's admiration for her courage and resilience became even stronger. Together they faced the unpredictability of nature, the challenges of the land, and the uncertainties of life, emerging stronger and more united than ever before. By the end of the week, the ranch was returning to normal. The animals were safe, the fences repaired, and the land beginning to recover from the storm. The cabin felt warmer and more secure, a symbol of their perseverance. Ethan and Clara spent quiet evenings together, reflecting on the events they had faced and the lessons they had learned. They understood that life on the ranch would always be demanding and unpredictable, but they also knew that together they could overcome any challenge. The storm, the fire, and the struggle had been the climax of their journey, the most intense and testing moment they had faced. It had revealed their true characters, their resilience, and the depth of their bond. The fear, exhaustion, and danger of the night had been replaced with relief, gratitude, and a renewed sense of purpose. They had survived together, and in doing so, they had discovered the strength and courage within themselves and within each other. For Ethan and Clara, life would never be the same again. The experience had transformed them, forging a connection that went beyond letters, hope, or anticipation. It was real, tested, and unbreakable. The ranch, the land, and the cabin became more than just a home. They became symbols of survival, love, and partnership. And as they looked toward the future, they knew that whatever challenging spring had settled fully over the ranch, and with it came a sense of calm and renewal. The snow had melted entirely, leaving the fields green and vibrant. The air was fresh and crisp in the mornings, filled with the scent of new grass, blooming flowers, and the occasional whiff of the river that ran along the edge of the property. Birds filled the skies with their cheerful songs, and the animals grazed contentedly in the open pastures. Life had returned to the ranch, but it was now richer, warmer, and fuller than it had been before Clara's arrival. Clara had fully recovered from her long, harrowing journey and the injuries she sustained along the way. She moved with confidence across the land, tending the animals, the garden, and even assisting Ethan with tasks that had once been challenging for her. Each day she grew stronger, more independent, and more comfortable in her new home. Her laughter filled the cabin, a sound that had been missing for far too long, and Ethan often found himself smiling quietly, grateful for her presence. The two of them had settled into a routine, one that balanced work, care, and shared moments of rest and conversation. Mornings were spent tending to the ranch, feeding the cattle, checking fences, and maintaining the fields. Afternoons often found them working together on repairs or projects around the property. Evenings were for relaxation, sitting by the fireplace in the cabin, sharing meals, and recounting stories from the day. It was a life of simplicity, but one that brought a profound sense of contentment and connection. Clara had also begun exploring the land more freely. She walked the fields alone, learned to identify plants and herbs, and even became skilled at tending to minor injuries or illnesses in the animals. Her bond with the ranch grew stronger with each passing day. She took pride in the small successes, like a fence that held after a storm, or a calf that thrived under her care. Ethan watched with admiration as she flourished, realizing that her resilience and determination were matched by her gentleness and thoughtfulness. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, Ethan and Clara took a walk along the creek. The water sparkled in the sunlight, and the sound of it flowing over the stones created a peaceful rhythm. They walked side by side, sometimes speaking and sometimes enjoying the quiet together. Clara stopped to admire a cluster of wildflowers, kneeling to examine them closely. Ethan observed her, noting the way she had adapted to the land, her curiosity and appreciation for the small details, and the serenity that now seemed to define her presence. "You've truly made this place your own," Ethan said softly, his voice filled with warmth. Clara looked up at him, smiling. "It feels like home," she replied. "I never imagined I could feel this way about a place I've never seen before. But you made it possible. You made me feel safe, and that mattered more than anything." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. Her words reminded him of the long months of worry, anticipation, and hope that had led them to this point. He realized that their connection had grown beyond letters, survival, and simple companionship. It had become a partnership built on trust, care, and shared experiences. Life continued to settle into a comfortable rhythm, but it was not without challenges. Spring storms occasionally swept across the plains, reminding them of the unpredictability of ranch life. There were days when tasks seemed endless, repairs needed to be made, and unexpected problems arose. Yet Ethan and Clara faced each challenge together, drawing strength from one another. Each success reinforced their confidence, and each difficulty reminded them of the importance of teamwork and communication. Clara's bond with the animals had grown particularly strong. The cattle seemed to respond to her calm presence, and even the more stubborn animals followed her instructions without hesitation. She had learned the nuances of the ranch, from understanding the behavior of the animals to predicting the weather and planning tasks accordingly. Ethan often marveled at her progress, noting how she had transformed from a nervous newcomer into a skilled, confident, and indispensable partner on the ranch. Their evenings were often spent reflecting on the journey that had brought them together. They spoke of Clara's long trip, the dangers she had faced, and the moments of fear and hope that had defined those early weeks. Ethan recounted his relentless search, the worry that had kept him awake at night, and the relief he felt when he finally found her alive. Clara shared her own memories of the journey, the exhaustion, the cold, the determination to survive, and the small moments of courage that had carried her forward. These conversations deepened their understanding of one another and strengthened their emotional connection. Over time, they also found ways to enjoy moments of lightness and joy. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the plains, sharing stories, jokes, and dreams for the future. They celebrated small successes together, such as a new calf being born or a garden producing its first vegetables. These shared experiences became the foundation of their life together, reinforcing the sense of partnership and mutual respect that had grown from adversity. As weeks turned into months, Clara began contributing ideas for improvements around the ranch. She suggested new ways to organize supplies, methods for improving the garden, and even plans for small projects that would make daily life easier. Ethan welcomed her input, appreciating her insight and initiative. Together, they worked to create a more efficient and comfortable home, blending her perspective with his knowledge of the land. This collaboration strengthened their bond, showing that they were equals in their shared life. The community around the ranch also began to notice the change. Neighbors who had once expressed doubt about the mail-order bride arrangement now saw Clara thriving, strong and capable, and they offered congratulations and support. Some came by to share news from town, lend tools, or offer help with larger tasks. The sense of connection to the wider community gave Clara a sense of belonging and reinforced the idea that she had truly found a new home, not just in the cabin, but within the people around her. Ethan and Clara also took time to reflect on their personal growth. Ethan realized that the months of waiting and searching had taught him patience, resilience, and the importance of hope. Clara understood the strength that lay within her, the ability to face adversity, and the courage it took to embrace a new life. Together they had grown individually and as a pair, learning lessons that would guide them through the challenges of ranch life and beyond. One afternoon they stood together at the edge of the field, watching the cattle graze under the warm sun. Clara leaned on Ethan's shoulder, smiling. "I never thought life could be this full," she said softly. Ethan nodded, feeling a deep sense of contentment. "It's not perfect," he replied. "The land is harsh, and life will always have its challenges. But together, we can face anything." Clara squeezed his hand, a silent promise that they would face it together, no matter what came their way. Over time, they began planning for the future. They discussed ways to expand the ranch, improve the cabin, and ensure a comfortable and sustainable life. They talked about the possibility of hosting visitors or neighbors, sharing the beauty of the land, and passing on the lessons they had learned about perseverance, resilience, and the value of human connection. These conversations were filled with hope and excitement, a sign that their lives had moved beyond mere survival into the realm of growth and possibility. As the seasons changed, the bond between Ethan and Clara only grew stronger. Their shared experiences had created a foundation of trust, care, and respect that would last a lifetime. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and physical challenges together and emerged not only unbroken, but closer than ever. The ranch had become a symbol of their journey, a place where adversity had been met with courage and where hope had been nurtured into reality. By the time summer arrived, the ranch was thriving. The fields were green, the animals healthy, and the cabin filled with warmth, light, and laughter. Ethan and Clara had created a life that was simple, yet rich in meaning and connection. Their days were filled with work, yes, but also with companionship, shared goals, and the quiet satisfaction of building something together. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Ethan and Clara sat on the porch, watching the plains stretch endlessly before them. The land that had once felt lonely and isolating now felt alive and full of promise. They spoke quietly of the journey they had endured, the dangers, the fear, the hope, and the triumph. And they knew in their hearts that they had found not only safety and survival, but something far greater, a partnership built on trust, courage, and the enduring power of human connection. In the end, life on the ranch continued, but it was no longer just about survival. It was about building, growing, and sharing a life together. The hardships they had faced had strengthened them. The journey they had endured had bonded them, and the love and respect they shared had become the foundation of a future full of promise. Ethan and Clara had found more than a home. They had found each other, and in that, they had found everything they truly needed.